My name is Jennifer Findley. I'm an avid art collector, and in finding my inspiration for an art collection, I've learned to navigate this sometimes intimidating art world. And I've taken this knowledge to help other art lovers curate collections that fit their space and their passion. I hope that you might find a little inspiration in this presentation as I walk you through my journey and love for collecting art, and what inspires me about a well-curated collection, and how the space where my art collection lives inspires and takes me to new heights of creativity. Finally, we'll sit down with Sarah Grossman of the Polychromist and talk to her about what inspires her to create her art and fashion-inspired posts. Please come into my home and see how I live with art. My story as a serious or curated art collector starts with discovering the famed 1965 exhibition at the MoMA, The Responsive Eye, where various new tendencies in abstraction appear on the art scene under the umbrella term of op art. And my collection is, for the most part, artists that emerged out of this groundbreaking exhibition. However, I'm not only focused on famed or the most prestigious artists of that genre, but also the periphery genius that didn't seem to get the limelight, but had something very special and unique to offer. So when I'm curating my personal collection and the space it will live in, I've created two limits to my collection that an artwork must fall into, and I almost never deviate from it. It must either be within a set color palette, black, white, gray, or yellow, and or an artist emerging from or highlighted in the Responsive Eye exhibition. Out of those strict categories, I am inspired by four themes of creation: perception, rhythm, kinetic playfulness, and undulation. And hopefully, as I walk you through what inspires me to collect, you will find inspiration too. Perception is a perspective that I take in cultivating the spaces around my artworks, which come from the artists that were very concerned by the issues and challenges associated with abstraction and non-objective perceptual art. A fancy way of saying how we see and understand. So when I'm thinking about a piece for my collection, I look at my perception as well as how any viewer may perceive it in relationship to the design and space around it. In other words, how will the space be perceived in relationship to the art? And how is the art perceived as its own design element within the space? When we were debating moving to San Diego, we wanted a home that could not only highlight and stand up architecturally to our collection, but also engage in dialogue with it. So we were determined, if possible, to find an architecturally interesting home. Our friend, Kathleen Shera of Showplace Interiors, not only helped us find the perfect home, but also helped us reimagine it for our growing family in the collection. A house that was not just beautiful, but thoughtful and purposeful. That led us to this magnificent Naegle home, perched like a sculpture in itself upon a pedestal. It was hard-edged, angular, full of light and space, shadow and vibrancy. But we also needed a house where two little kids could live and grow up. We integrated art that was colorful and geometric to inspire the girls, as well as commissioned a mural by a local artist, Stephanie Bales, who was inspired by the collection to create her own inspiration for two pieces that the girls could actually touch. We wanted to maximize also our outdoor space, tearing out and reworking all the balconies, adding in glass railings so our children and our small dog didn't fall to their death, but also highlighting the stark contrast of black and white interplay, as well as showcasing the strong angles of the house. We also repurposed all the old balcony railings on the back porch so as to keep them as part of the original house. We also knew that the house would act as a living space for my collection, and so we wanted lighting and beautiful walls. We had to rework the majority of the walls and the ceilings and paint them with the perfect shade of white. On any wall that can potentially hang art, there is lighting to enhance it. But we wanted all the lighting to be energy efficient, so we rewired the entire house to accommodate LED lighting and even outlets on art walls. So in the future, if we wanted to plug a piece into the wall without seeing a plug, we could show it. We also knew we needed to cut down on dust and regulate humidity and the temperature to not only preserve the art and also our kids' comfort, but the house didn't have air conditioning and only had a few rooms with vents for heating. We added state-of-the-art energy-efficient units while also carefully adding angular softening that would complement the lines of the house and house the actual inner workings of the air conditioning. Also, we created a few more show places for the art. I wanted the framework of the house, the elements that are so fundamental to Naegle's design, to be seamless with the architecture, so there would be no distraction for the eye, only intrigue and excitement. A clean and complementary palette for the art to be perceived and engaged with, and I think this space perfectly gives me that perception. All right, here's my first collector's tip. Art should not be exposed to extreme temperature fluctuations or dust, and should be maintained at a steady humidity level. In other words, treat your art like you would your baby's nursery, and by all means keep it clean. But unlike a baby, do not handle it too much. You should probably handle your baby a little bit. Also, paintings, although oil paintings can usually handle it better, in general, you should not expose works to direct sunlight. This is particularly true of works on paper or watercolors. Works on paper should be framed properly with museum glass. And please, please avoid at all costs hinging or attaching work on paper to backing that cannot be easily removed. Your framer will want to do this. Do not let them. It is a bit more expensive to use the removable hinges, but well worth it for a special piece of art. Julian Stanchik said, "If I take the time to really look at what I'm seeing, there is no limit to the secrets unveiled." This house is a very open floor plan, and from most rooms, you can see at least one or several other rooms. So when I was curating the different spaces, I wanted it to feel like your eye was listening to John Coltrane's rendition of My Favorite Things during the day, and then Miles Davis's Round Midnight at night. Jazz, jazz, jazz. I wanted it to be like music for the eyes. I know, eyes don't hear, but I want my spaces and art to become heard, so they can trigger our memory, which hears, feels, and smells. And in my creative spaces, I always put primacy on my felt perception, imagination, and experience over boring old reality any day. For me, my collection in space should be an orchestration of line, color, form. Here you can see it. It has jazz, musicality, conversation, sharp corners, striking but harmonious, quick movements, ta 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 ta, ch ch ch, oomph, action. The artists I focus on are typically very interested in not only color theory and non-objective perceptual abstraction, but on ordered systems that lead to elevated states. To me, that's music, that's jazz. And it's no surprise many of the artists I collect were either musicians or jazz lovers. In fact, Lars Gunnar Nordstrom had one of the largest collections of jazz records in Finland. And it's no coincidence at all that these artists play so well in this house, where you can see Dale Naegle's musical qualities also coming out. The space of this house is based in Bauhaus ideals and the concept of a Gesamtkunstwerk of design. The art may be given primacy in my mind, but in the room, the viewer feels the continuous rhythm, the theme. Hard edges, geometric shapes, squares and rectangles, and soft refrains. Along with the design elements, the artwork in this room is really focused on a very specific style, and it really encourages the viewer to experience and perceive specific elements that draws you in, as well as highlights the design aesthetic of this room. I'd like to focus on a few pieces in particular that have a lot of meaning to me, that also fit within my curated collection. One of the more important works in this room is this 1964 Jeffrey Steele, The Conspiracy. The title of the work is in Welsh, but I'll save you my Welsh accent and call it The Conspiracy. I love the interaction across the decades to one of his later works, from here all the way up to the hallway, where you see a piece from 2009. I love to see that he continually worked with similar themes. You kind of see these lightning bolt structures, lines, forms, still consuming him even in his later years. In fact, he just died last year, and he famously chose not to abandon his earlier ideas, even as he progressed in his artistic state, but instead perfected his monochromatic forms. And then you have this wonderful view to see a Sewell Silman, who was an artist, but was better known for working with the father of op art, Joseph Albers, to produce his publications and various silk screens. And like I mentioned, I'm also interested in not only entirely curated pieces, but also sentimental ones. Of course, I do like them to fall into the categories of my collection, but I do allow exceptions. And a piece that corresponds to that sentimentality is the Lars Gunnar Nordstrom piece over here. So I'd like to tell you a little story. We had a very difficult time getting pregnant, and after much tragedy, as many people go through, we were finally told we couldn't carry. So we had our little embryo carried by a surrogate. But the process was still hit or miss, and we had to go to Europe for work for my husband. And while we were waiting to hear if the pregnancy would be viable, I remember looking across the square from my hotel window in Helsinki and seeing a gallery. And in the window, it had the most fantastic works from the famed abstract Finnish artist Lars Gunnar Nordstrom, or as he's known there, Nuben. And I promised myself, if the doctor called and said the pregnancy was viable, I would walk over there and get our little baby to be one of these pieces. And now we have a Lars Gunnar Nordstrom and a beautiful baby girl. We actually have two beautiful baby girls, but that's a whole nother story. This wonderful work of art makes me so happy by a celebrated artist who I found out had a lot in common with other constructivist painters in my collection, such as the Jeffrey Steele that I was talking to you about before, and may have even influenced each other based on an important exhibition in the 70s in Helsinki. I just love his use of industrial paints and his almost public street sign-like quality that you can see your reflection in. I also adore the artist we commissioned, the sculpture next to it by Esteban Patino. He's an artist that I really love, and I try to place him and promote him wherever I can. He is a fascinating artist who has created his own language from 6 symbols that, when turned in 4 different positions, can create a language of 24 characters. His works are sinuous sentinels that seek the symbolic approximation of atemporality. They are amorphous, abstract, as well as architectural, and they portray the complexities of time and human existence. And they are inspired by his native country of Colombia. When we saw that there was a pedestal, immediately when you walked through the door, I knew the artist I wanted to come home to. That was Esteban. Both of these artists are sentimental to me and important, and although they fit conceptually into my collection, not particularly neatly do they fit. Here's another tip for you. Find your passion and stick with it. There is something spectacular in a collection that maintains its integrity through the years. Indeed, this is what sets apart a collector from a hoarder. You must find your inspiration. Hone this by going to museums, galleries, and looking at social media. See what jumps off the page to you. Once you have found your inspiration, start the process all over again with those categories in mind. And then start collecting slowly. See if you develop a color palette or a theme or a style, a genre. Abstracts, plein air, pop art, works on paper, pieces and variations of blue, or only contemporary artists. Those kind of categories can lead to a carefully cultivated collection. And believe me, there is a difference between a thoughtful and mindful collection and purely buying anything that fits your fancy or that comes your way. Editing or creating a system of categories is what usually leads the eye to beauty, just as in literature, design, music, or really any artistic endeavor. As Coco Chanel used to say, to dress with style, you should look in the mirror and remove one accessory. And although I am a strong advocate of the edit and the curated collection, there should be a few exceptions or anomalies, or you can at least make room for some along the way. Mine are over there. So my next theme for my collection is kinetic movement and playfulness. Playing off of Duchamp and Dadaism, many kinetic artists have a playfulness to their work, a fundamental tongue-in-cheekness to the precision of their compositions, like this one. Jules Stein's piece exemplifies that playfulness. It has sister pieces in the Pompidou and was wonderfully featured in Le Prisonnier by Henri-Georges Clouzot. And if you can find that movie, it's a bit difficult. You will see a vertigo-inducing montage of Kinetic artworks from the 60s, including this one. I am drawn to these works because the absolutely and fundamentally egalitarian nature of them. The viewer must become part of the creative act. You animate the piece to allow it to become its full actualization, and then you can step back and meditate on the movement and the simplicity as you merge with the sensory experience. However, the artist allows you to become part of the art and takes away his hierarchical or objective stance as the unitary creator. In these works, the goal is the perception in itself, and that perception is unique each time it is initiated. That's why I love these fun things. Here's another fun little piece. I just adore this John Goodyear Curve in Motion from 1964, pre-responsive eye. The simplicity of this piece and the complex planes that emerge from it, mixed with that most fundamental perceptual visual form coming out of the op art movement, the moire. That's that wood grain-like effect that you see happening. It is absolutely spectacular. It's being achieved in the simplest way by a wood grid hung from fishing wire and 2 simple screws and a canvas of curves that go to motion. Here's another collecting tip. Have aspirations. Pieces might come your way that you have been dreaming about for years. Be ready to jump on it. Also, find pieces that make you happy. My grandmother used to always say, a room was not finished until it had 1 piece of leopard print in it. So figure out what your leopard print is, your secret seduction or playful joke. Mine is pieces I can touch and make dance. Although, I should be using a glove. My collection is inspired and dedicated, although I do have exceptions, to artists that emerged out of the Responsive Eye exhibition in 1965. However, it's not a true op art only collection, but rather a responsive eye focused collection. This exhibition was groundbreaking and was so fantastically popular that the idea of op art became embraced by the public and the fashion world and the design world, and simultaneously denounced by formal art critics. However, the exhibition highlighted various groups and artists that were looking for something new ways of creating, seeing, and physically experiencing art. The majority of them had backgrounds in music or mathematics or architecture or design. They were engaged in providing the viewer with what could be called, for the most part, a physically objective sensation with a simultaneously subjective response. In other words, to create in the spectator a spontaneous emotional reaction based on sensory experience in the eye. Where do you go in your memory, in your mind, in yourself, when you sit and stare into these pieces? I go to a place of inspiration, and a place that leads me to a more informed aesthetic self, but also joy and childhood memory of seeing and manipulating sight for the first time. That is what I love about what emerged out of the responsive eye, or the zeitgeist of an abstract spirit post-World War II, which culminated in op art, color field painting, hard edge constructivists, etc. These artists that were seeking to show an order and understanding of a system of creation and display, and at the same time entirely destroy hierarchy and create democratic accessibility. You don't have to know the story of St. George and the Dragon to understand the context of the work or the metaphor or concept it is highlighting or challenging, but it may evoke the same feeling of emotion, of a lost self, or heightened excitement, as a powerful myth might have done for a Renaissance audience, seeing powerful representational form for the first time. Here, the non-representational gives us that same feeling. Repeating variables, it lives, it breathes, it makes you go somewhere. It's a contemplative experience. One of the pieces that I'd like to highlight in my collection is a Gene Davis piece. It's an untitled piece, but yet it envelops you in its intervals and totally encompasses you in its movement. Unlike some op artists, Davis is known for his color field paintings, so this piece is unusual. To have a work of his in black and white. But Davis did say towards the end of his career that he was interested in interval more than color. But when I'm looking at this piece, I like to pick a certain line or a stripe of a certain size and find it across the piece and see what it does in the process. Another piece that speaks and dialogues with the Davis in the dining room is the Peter Sedgley. This is an early piece, 64, and it's variations on this yellow tone that I love. And in that tone, it creates movement. I always feel this painting is breathing in and out, like an ancient being being called and drawing you in. It's kind of fun. You either are sitting on the Davis side or you're sitting on the Sedgley side. But either way, when you're in the dining room, you're having a very interesting experience. This piece behind me is by Richard Aniszkiewicz, a prominent figure out of the responsive eye and an advocate of op art very early in the 60s. He was Yale taught under Joseph Albers. He worked with color and obsessions and saturation and laser-like lines. He has dedicated and dialogue. His line paintings were committed to the optical experience and color play. And in it, you kind of see yourself being pulled in, and yet it also speaks out to you. And this piece, so appropriately sitting up here in La Jolla, seeing the view, is the title Sunlight Verticals. And when we placed it here, we really were committed to the idea that when we were looking out at the sky, we would also see what was reflected in Aniszkiewicz's painting. One of the things that's interesting, particularly about Aniszkiewicz and another artist that I'm going to talk to you shortly, Julian Stanchek, is they really were dedicated to a concept of art really with very little deviation their whole career. They became fascinated with line and color, and how could those line and colors play to create an emotional sensation in the viewer. Another artist is such a great example of creating sensations and memory plays in the viewer by using line and undulation. Julian Stanchek was not only a spectacular artist, but also an amazing human being. At the age of 13, he lost the use of his right arm in a Siberian labor camp, and the rest of his life would have to learn to produce this fantastic art using his left hand, the hand that he was not dominant or was not born to use, but because he was forced into that situation out of such sad circumstances. And yet, a perfect example of turning a tragedy into an amazing, spectacular benefit to the world. He moved to America and he studied with, like Aniszkiewicz, Joseph Albers. In fact, Richard Aniszkiewicz and Julian Stanchek were roommates at Yale. The op art movement was in fact named after his major show. This piece is a bit unique for him, as one of his first line paintings. It really does undulate and dance. The prism is almost like a marionette without strings. It's an abstract form combined with an obsession with color, which led to these optical experiences for him, these phenomenons. He once famously said, "Color is abstract, universal, yet personal and private in experience." In other words, we all see it. It's an objective reality, but we feel it differently. Well, these are the ideas and concepts that inspire me to collect. And here's another collecting tip. Gallery versus auction versus artist. When you're thinking about collecting, most people start to think about a gallery. If you're working with a gallery, it's at a premium. It's being laid out and made easy for you, so the cost is always going to go up in that. And unfortunately, young collectors or emerging collectors really have an intimidation over entering a gallery and asking for a price list. But you still need to do your research. Galleries are most likely to give you all the information you want in order to seal the deal. So if you're looking for publications, provenance, letters of authenticity, all things you should be looking for, this is the moment to get them. Don't necessarily trust a gallery's prices. Look at past auction results. What's been happening in the markets? The easiest way to keep up with this is to really find an art advisor or collection facilitator who knows your style and keeps their eyes out constantly for your interest. That's how I got started loving pieces and passionately learning about them. Anyone can do it. It just takes time and excitement. Another tip, social media and going directly to the artist. This is the new frontier. Often new artists aren't represented by a gallery yet and are more willing to work with you on costs. Artists are more likely to give you a deal if you're a repeat customer, a collector, and if you can show you're developing a true collection. developing a relationship with artists is vital, and I highly encourage you to do so. I do want to give a few gallery call-outs because even though galleries are at the premium, there are wonderful learning experiences for the young emerging collector. And here's a few of my favorites. Mark Quint here in San Diego, down in La Jolla, Diane Rosenstein in LA, Louis Stern, Miles McHenry, Barry Campbell, Loretta Howard in New York, and of course, Galerie Denise Rene in Paris, some of the most fantastic galleries I've ever worked with. Now let's take some time and talk to an emerging collector and lover of art to find out what inspires her and some insights into the San Diego art scene. So let's talk to Sarah. So I'm here with Sarah Grossman of the Polychromist, the amazing, amazing Insta blog inspired by art and fashion. Fantastic. And Sarah's been so great to come and talk to us about her interest in art and what inspires her as she's developing these amazing fashion vignettes. So I'm going to take a few minutes to just grill Sarah on all her exciting interests in art. So Sarah, when did you really fall in love with art? Was there like a special moment for you?
I definitely have a couple moments that stick out to me as I was a child. So I do have a lot of artists in my family. And I have this very strong memory of being about 6 or 7 years old and visiting my aunt and uncle in San Francisco, and my parents letting them take me for the day to a couple museums. And I remember being at I believe it was the Modern Art Museum, and being in the galleries. Really, that was my first experience being in a fine art setting, and just being overwhelmed and blown away with what I saw, and just kind of, wow, what is this that I'm looking at right now? Yeah. And coming away with that experience and going home, and then they mailed me a bunch of kids' art books after that, like a whole bunch of them. And I still have a couple of the ones they sent me, but I would pore over those. And I think they were like Mary Cassatt and Van Gogh, like very, the big names. But just learning all about their lives, what they went through, and what their art was about in sort of a very kid-friendly way. But just really from that moment, I learned as much as I could, and I was pretty obsessed.
So was like that, with you kind of starting to interact with art, was that something that really inspired you when you were starting the Polychromist? Or what really got you to get into that framework?
I mean, I think that's honestly in my life a more recent development, the kind of Insta blog and blogging and pairing, but my whole life has really been about art. I've always known I wanted to work in the arts. I went to art school. I've always drawn. I've always made art myself, even though I knew I didn't want to be a career artist, but I knew I wanted to be in the arts. And I think what really started me with Polychromist and my blog and Instagram was kind of people telling me, well, you look a certain way, like why do you dress like that? What is this about? They tell me, have you done a blog? Why aren't you doing a blog? 'Cause you have this way that you communicate your fashion. And so I just started dabbling in it. I got into it not really knowing what I would do with it necessarily, and it sort of grew on its own. It just grew as it grew.
Right.
Yeah.
And kind of like, what do you see when you're thinking of like your blogs? Like, I mean, are you thinking of like just the fashion? Are you thinking of the art? I mean, it's really something where fashion and art completely intersect. Yeah. And so like, what takes you there? Like, what inspires you to?
People ask me that a lot, actually. It goes both ways. So sometimes I see this beautiful piece of clothing and I'm like, I need to find something that goes with that. Or sometimes I see an art installation or an exhibition or a piece of public artwork or a mural. I'm like, I need to find something that goes with that. So it goes both ways because both inspire me equally, I think, fashion and art. And so that's how I've always blended that for some reason. Okay. When I see a piece of art, I want to recreate that in what I'm wearing. Whatever inspires me about the design of this, I want that on my body, basically. Right. I want it on me. Yeah. How do I carry it around with me everywhere I go? Yeah.
For sure. And I think like that's really true about like design and art. They sometimes get like put into, separate corners. Mm-hmm. And I think it's not really should be the case. I mean, really you should have this kind of intersection because they play so well together and they really are in dialogue. And that's something, I always encourage people to do is like really get into that place where you're like, absolutely. What's my inspiration? Is it design? Is it art? Is it both? What is combining them? Mm-hmm. So what are some of your favorite blog posts that you've done?
Oh man,
there's like just a couple, a couple,
Yeah, I'll say a couple more
maybe
recent
art,
ones.
Maybe super focused on art and design since we have
maybe a couple of them that resonated the most with some of the audience. I would say a couple I've done more recently. One was with there's a local artist named, she goes by Panka, I believe. And she has this really cool way of working with color, and it's very playful and cartoonistic. And I came across this fashion design. She started off as just a kind of a normal everyday like 2D artist, but she started putting her art onto clothing, and it really took off. And something about the way she made art onto clothing, and then the way Panka made art, it just blended. It was an immediate like, oh my gosh, I have to put these two together.
Yeah.
And so I contacted her, and she sent me something to shoot with, and it was this. It's very just meant to be happy. I guess it's a lot of pink, and it's a lot of, there's eyes and brains and all sorts of strange things on it. And then in her art, there's like strawberries and lemons and lightning bolts, and so it's just this like, when you look at it, you're just like, what am I looking at?
Right.
That's definitely one of my favorites. And one of people have contacted me about that a bunch. Like, what is this? Just what is this? And then another one I've done recently, which is definitely along the op art. I found this really cool vintage black and white op art dress. And I knew I had to find something for it. And I came across this mural in a parking garage in downtown San Diego of an apartment complex by his name is he goes by Exist 1981.
Oh, cool.
And it's almost the exact same print as the dress, which is crazy. And so we tried to do these optical pairings where it looked like my dress stopped, or I was blending into the mural. So I like to do that too. It's not always about color. Sometimes it's just about high contrast and like real visual impact.
When you're thinking about like artworks and what inspires you and what interests you, I know that you have some passions surrounding art. So what are some of the kind of genres or styles of art that you're feeling yourself really drawn to lately?
I mean,
or just in general?
Just in general, yeah. Lately and always, it's always been not so much figurative work, but definitely things with a lot of geometry, a lot of form, definitely a lot of optical illusion, a lot of contrast, and always either, I kind of swing between a lot of color or a really high contrast black and white.
Yeah.
It's kind of my two spectrums. Definitely lots of color in one painting, or just a lot of saturated color, and I love gradients, and I tend to love art that's circular for whatever reason. Circles and paintings that have a lot of circles going into a center point, for some reason, that always really draws me in. So I also share a lot of art on my page in addition to what I create. I like the contrast of seeing what I do with art that also inspires me. And I look at my page, I'm like, wow, I just really like things that bring you in.
Right. And you've been working a lot with like you work with a lot of art that's kind of public or visible, you know, to the public, whether it be in murals or museums and different. Now, you also are thinking about like art that inspires you like at home. Like what are the types that you, like if you were thinking of like your perfect collection or pieces that would bring you inspiration in your like daily space, what would those be?
It's probably pretty similar. I do have. I guess it's not going to put you to sleep in your house, so I try not to put them like near my bed. But definitely things that are colorful, things that are going to inspire me the same way that what I see on the street inspires me. That's what I want in my home too. I really want a lot of color, a lot of geometry. I paint walls so that they make these things pop out the same way. I like walls in my house that have two colors that high contrast as well. So it's kind of similar. I guess I don't deviate too much from what I love.
Well, I also am, committed to committed to a very strict curation style, so I get that totally. So when you're kind of developing some of your posts, what are you really hoping that your viewers get out of them?
I think I just want them to either be inspired or make them feel happy, feel joy, just feel curiosity about art. Maybe it helps me being in part of the artwork, makes them see the art in a different way. And then on the fashion side, I just want people to not take it so seriously. I want them to feel comfortable to try things. Because I mean, mine's a little wild. It doesn't have to go that wild, but I feel like people need to feel more comfortable. They don't have to be in a certain box. They can really try things out and not take it too seriously and have fun with it. Because I have fun with art and fashion. I think it's part of my everyday life, and it brings me so much joy. So that's what I want people to take away from it.
And it makes, like, I feel like whenever I see your post, it just makes me super happy. Like, I'm like, ooh, that's such a fun thing, right? And I think that's something too, that the art world, it gets so bogged down in seriousness and taking itself so seriously and, oh, we're so fantastic. And it can be very hierarchical. And I love that your posts really bring it down to a democratic level that we can really understand. It's like, yes, you have both high fashion and you have high art and you have street art and you have street fashion. And they're combining together in like this wonderful, wonderful dialogue with each other. And I think that that is really the new frontier. And, you know, for people that are thinking about collections and kind of how to develop those collections, it's really finding that place, I think, in themselves of where are those dialogues and how can I get access to it? And it's like, you don't have to be a curator in a museum. You do not have to be, you know, Guggenheim to have an art collection, and you do not have to have that to have that love. And I think that is such an inspiration that I find in what you do, and I hope that other people find that inspiration too when they're thinking about like art and what they're doing with their collections. Okay, so I know I'm going to ask you the question that everybody wants to know. What is it about like the polychromatic scale of color that just is so exciting and fascinating to you?
That's a really hard question because it's like, why do you love what you love? It's a hard thing to describe to people. I guess I've always, my whole life, just been so attracted to color, and when I see a full spectrum, I just get so much joy out of seeing the transition of that, and it just makes my heart sing. It's like a hard thing to say, like why I love it, but it just something about the way my brain works. I just want so much variety in color. I can't even tell people what my favorite color is. It's not a thing I can say. I say rainbow. What's your favorite color? Rainbow. All of them. What? I can't say that I hate or love any color more than another. It's just always been like that.
I always feel like that's too, like when people will ask me like, what's your favorite piece of art? I'm like, oh, I don't know. Like
so
I can't.
Hard,
I love them for their own reason, you know. And I think that it's a typical question that people ask, but how do we say what we love?
Yeah, it's hard. Why does my brain work the way it works?
Exactly.
But I mean, apparently other people's do too. So it's fun to be able to put out there what you put out there, and then people respond that they see the world in a similar way. That's why visual art's so cool, because you see things differently, but you can also find people that see things very similarly. Right.
And you also too, I mean, I think the thing about like your polychromatic scale, it really draws people in because it does give them like a happy feeling, a joyful feeling. It is inspirational to their own creativity, like you're saying. So speaking of like inspirational pieces and fun things that deal with, you put together this year at the San Diego Museum of Art, basically an op art themed dinner amongst the San Diego patrons. Can you tell us a little bit about like what inspired you? I know you love some op artists that we have in common. Of course, Richard Anaskevich, you know, as one of
the big
them.
Ones, yes. It's something I've always wanted to do. Loving the type of art I love. It's not exclusive to op art, but I think op art sort of is the epitome of color, contrast, and geometry. And so when I got the opportunity to do this, I obviously jumped at it and went wild with it. It was a lot of look, but I think that's the whole point of op art, is look, make you look more, like make your eyes move all over. It was just so much fun, and it's a goal of mine someday to be able to own even a print of, say, a Vasarely would be. I've made it in my life that I have a Vasarely.
Well, you know, I say this to you all the time, that you don't have to, like, to have a Vasarely print is not as out of reach, you know? It's like, sometimes, you know, people get this idea that these pieces that are in museums are out of reach to them, and they're not. I mean, yes, there's all kinds of scales, but some of these wonderful artists, you know, they either aren't part of the strong kind of push in the museum culture, so to like push their prices extremely, of course, Vasarely is another site, but nevertheless, you have, you know, this real, you do have accessibility, and, you know, when you're thinking of kind of aspirational and like within your reach pieces, which is what I encourage people to do when they're thinking about a collection. What are some of your, like you just mentioned, aspirational pieces, but what are some of the artists too that you feel like, hey, these are the artists that I feel like I can have?
Yeah, I mean, Vasarely and like a Julio Park print, or, you know, and of course, all the ones you have in your collection are definitely in the aspirational someday. Love to have them, but luckily with Instagram, you have access to such a wealth of people who are following in that school. There's an artist right now named Gina Davis. I think she's out of Tennessee. She's like a new school op artist. And it's a simplified version of kind of the masters, but her color story just speaks to me all the time, and is, you know, not inexpensive, but
Right.
it's accessible.
Right,
It's
yeah.
absolutely accessible, and I've been eyeballing her
Yeah,
website
yeah.
for a while. When she does these drops, and they sell out very quickly,
Right,
and so
right.
it's inspiring to see these artists being successful
Yeah.
and people purchasing them at that kind of scale. And so, yeah, she's one of the ones I have my eye on.
Yeah.
And then I've just started, I collect some prints of my friend. His name is Monty Montgomery. I have some of his prints.
Nice.
And so I have some of those in my house, and my aspiration is to have one of his paintings in my house. I had one of his on long-term loan when he was moving.
Shout out, Monty.
Monty, hook me up, dude. Yeah, I have a wall where he had a long-term loan of his when he was moving. He had let me hold on to it for a few months, and then
my
I just
gosh.
like, well, now I have to have one.
Yeah, I mean, once you experience it, I think
Yeah.
that's so too. I mean, it, works on paper and oils, but when you experience sometimes with the painting where you feel like, wow, it's like I'm here with it.
Oh, yeah.
There's an aura that definitely develops with it. But then again, there are so many artists that did fantastic works on paper where they were, especially in the op art movement in the 60s, where they were developing the idea of, lithographs and, multiples. And in that regard, they were actually really active in a way that sometimes we don't think of. We think, just a computer printed it. It's not.
No.
There's a whole.
It's hand.
There's a whole art to this, and they're very active. And I think that, it shouldn't be discounted to have, works on paper.
And the color is still so rich, and you can really see the craftsmanship in it still on a work on paper. For
Absolutely,
sure.
absolutely. So, I encourage people a lot when they're thinking about what are they going to do, how, especially I think emerging collectors, deal with a lot of collectors that are very much like, within their worlds, and they're, older, and they have a very curated perspective. But when you're young and you're an emerging collector, young or old, emerging, you can start to think, what is it that is kind of like my style? Like, what is it that I want? What am I kind of getting at? And I think one of the things that I encourage people to do is like, yes, go to a museum, yes, experience these things, but also social media has made this so accessible. So it's like, type in a hashtag. How do you use like Instagram and social media to kind of find your inspiration?
Absolutely. I follow hashtags for things I like.
Yeah.
And then anytime I see people sharing art, and I just follow those artists and comment on them, and then I see them on my feed. So I've curated my feed to really show me what I want to see.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Show me what I want to see, and
exactly.
I put out what I want people to see, and then it shows me the same thing back, which is really cool. But I've made so many connections with artists on there just by sharing their art, because I'm like, your art's amazing, and I share it on my page, and they're like, thank you so much, and I made connections with them.
Right.
There's such a wealth of accessibility that social media has brought to the art world, for sure. Not just in the digital sphere as well, not even just purchasing it and keeping your home, but you can kind of create a digital gallery for yourself of things you love, and you can connect with people.
Right. I mean, it's not everything needs to be hung to be real art, to experience it and to find inspiration. So you are super involved in the San Diego art scene. You are kind of in the in. What is it about the San Diego art scene that's really exciting to you right now?
Well, I mean, I guess we get kind of a bad rap for being small and stuck into LA, but there's so much talent here. There really is. I would say I love that it's such a tight-knit community, and you get to know people really well. You form really close relationships, because I guess it's quieter than some of the larger cities, but it's still so robust.
Right.
So it's easy to make connections. I'd say I feel like it's a friendly art talent. You really can meet a lot of down-to-earth people, and of all types: sculpture, painting, works on paper, clay, anything. Yeah. I just wish there was more avenues to show them. That's what I wish for.
Yeah, more galleries,
more places, more venues for them to be able to show.
Yeah, because there is so much talent that it would be nice to have, like, you can have more than just a few galleries that are showcasing it, and really that are dedicated, to local community. Would be very nice. I do think we can give a little shout out to some of your favorite. Do you have any favorite San Diego artists right now that we can give a little shout out to?
Of course I do.
Come on, let's give it to them.
I mean, a lot of them become good friends. Like Stephanie Bales, she's amazing. She's got a gallery.
We're talking about Stephanie Bales today too.
Oh
yes, she did the mural for the girls.
That's right. I forgot about she's great. Sarah Steiber is a local artist who I've become friends with, and she's dipping her toes into the home design world now, and she's we call each other there's a color lovers sort of community of artists in San Diego that I've latched onto. And of course, Monty, who was local until very recently, and he's moved back to Virginia.
Well, thank you, Sarah, for coming here and talking to us about kind of what's exciting to you, especially as I know you're starting into like emerging into actually collecting. You already started, but kind of getting to some of those more aspirational, and I'm trying to, help you get there. But I think that that's definitely something that everyone should have access to, is like, what do you want? What can you get? What do you have now? And also giving yourself the opportunity to talk to artists like you do is such an inspirational aspect.
Absolutely.
So I really appreciate you mentioning that and kind of bringing that out to everyone. So thanks for coming today. I hope you enjoyed this walkthrough, my inspiration for collecting, and I hope that you will feel inspired to look and find what inspires you. Remember, you don't have to be a Peggy Guggenheim to own great art. Art happens on all levels of the price spectrum. And although it is a luxury, museum quality art can often easily be had for the price of a designer handbag. Thank you. Now go collect.